The new neighbor next door always seemed pleasant, but every night I could hear whispers through the walls, beckoning me closer, urging me to join them in the darkness. I caught a glimpse of my neighbor through their window, but their reflection didn't match their movements. It smiled at me, while they stared blankly ahead. Every time I passed my neighbor's house, I felt eyes boring into my soul. When I glanced back, there was never anyone there. One day, I noticed my neighbor watering their plants in the yard. The plants seemed to be whispering to them, their leaves twisting into grotesque shapes as if begging for mercy. I thought my neighbor was just eccentric until I found a hidden room in their basement, filled with dolls that looked eerily like the missing children from our town. My neighbor always had a peculiar smell emanating from their house, but when the authorities investigated, they found nothing but an empty, decrepit building with no trace of life. I waved to my neighbor across the street, but their face contorted into a grotesque grin that sent shivers down my spine. I realized later they weren't human. Every night, I heard scratching at my window. When I finally mustered the courage to look, I saw my neighbor's face pressed against the glass, twisted in agony, begging for release. My neighbor invited me over for dinner. When I entered his home, I realized the pictures on the walls were all of me, taken from inside my own house. I watched as my neighbor dug a grave in their backyard, but when I asked them about it, they smiled and said it was for their beloved pet. Later that same night, I awoke to him in my room standing above me menacingly. I often saw my neighbor staring out of their attic window, but when I went to investigate, I found the room empty, save for an old mirror reflecting a face that wasn't mine. My neighbor had a collection of old family portraits, but as I looked closer, I noticed the faces were all distorted, as if someone had tried to erase their identities. I received a letter from my neighbor, inviting me to a midnight gathering in their backyard, but when I arrived, I found myself surrounded by hooded figures chanting in a language I couldn't understand. My neighbor always wore long sleeves, even in the sweltering heat, but one day, I caught a glimpse of their arms covered in strange symbols that seemed to writhe and pulse with a life of their own. I stumbled upon my neighbor's diary in the street, and as I flipped through its pages, I realized they had been documenting every move I made, every breath I took, with alarming detail.